Welcome to this podcast today with Eduardo Mello, Assistant Professor of Politics and International Relations. And Eduardo is also working on issues of political economy of development and has experiences doing evaluation for governments and international organizations. Also joining me is Paulo Pedroso, a sociologist and Associate Professor at ISCTE in Lisbon. He has a lot of experience conducting evaluations in Europe and the Middle East. And myself, I'm Annelien Groten, an evaluation practitioner and lecturer at ISCTE in Lisbon, Portugal. We're here today to have a conversation on innovation in humanitarian response, and we'll be talking particularly about participatory evaluation in humanitarian settings, which is part of the InovHumRe project. So, Paulo, maybe you can elaborate a bit on the rationale and objectives of the InovHumRe project and what it aims to achieve, and who are involved in the project. Why did you come together to do this project?
Thank you. So basically, this project is an Erasmus Plus project in which 5 universities cooperate to develop a tool for evaluation, for participatory evaluation, that intends to be useful for people studying in the academy and also for practitioners in the field. We are dealing with different settings because 2 of our universities are Latin American, and in Brazil, from where Eduardo comes, and in Colombia, Fundação Getúlio Vargas and Universidad ICESI in Cali. And one other is from Middle East, is HGTP University in Ankara, Turkey, and one Portuguese and one Spanish, the ISCTE, from where both of us come, and Universidad Nacional de Educación a Distancia from Madrid. All the idea behind is that evaluation in humanitarian action has been quite often commanded by what we could call the sponsors of the operations, the international organizations that themselves implement projects or finance projects for other institutions. And in evaluation, one of the key topics is how you regard the involved populations. Are they target population? Are they participants? Are they clients? Are they stakeholders? Are they a key part of the process? And the idea between, I would say in a broad sense, because we will discuss about it, in a broad sense about participation, is to increase the engagement and the accountability of evaluators to the final beneficiaries of these operations. So not only having an evaluation that is useful in the perspective of the donor or the implementing agency, but that is also relevant for the experience of the beneficiaries, and an evaluation in which we can learn from what happened in the field. I think that's what we are going to discuss a bit in the next few minutes, right, Annelien?
Yes, thank you very much. That's correct. And actually, one of the outputs or deliverables of the project is a handbook on participatory evaluation in humanitarian action. Eduardo, why do you think such handbook would be necessary, or how do you think, what gaps does it fill in the literature?
So I think the primary reason why we set out to write a handbook is that we really want to create the material so that we can train a new generation of scholars and practitioners that can engage in participatory evaluation, that can assess the outcomes of participatory evaluations conducted in the field. Nowadays, what we find lacking is that there is no systematic approach to teach our students these concepts, these techniques, to give them the tools so that they can go into the field and conduct helpful, valuable participatory evaluation, nor there are the tools for scholars to learn and make use, interpret the results coming from these exercises. So what we're trying to do here is to set out the base for what we think would be a new generation of experts in evaluation that can put one more tool in their toolbox, one more type of evaluation, one more way of engaging with stakeholders, with beneficiaries, with policymakers that would be helpful for them and hopefully for the projects they're engaged in. We think this kind of textbook would be a good basis for courses at both advanced undergraduate level and at graduate level, aiming to train students in these techniques.
And I think, Annelien, you yourself, let's say, coordinated in the first phase of the project something that had a very important output that justifies the need of this handbook. Is that, if I'm wrong, you correct me, but we found in a diagnostic study that we did in Brazil, Colombia, Portugal, Spain, and Turkey, that though NGOs involved in the field, they have an experience with evaluation, they don't have familiarity with participatory methods. And I think this is also important, but maybe, let's say, about this study, you can tell us something more, no?
Yes, well, and in particular, what you're also trying to say, I think, very much is that we're trying to, with this handbook, trying to bridge the gap between theory and practice, which has also been one of the aims of the project in general, and why we have the inclusion of the NGOs in the project that can bring evidence from the different contexts on participatory evaluation, what has happened, what challenges they have faced, and what are the stumble blocks. I think these are some of the aspects that have not yet been sufficiently researched, and where our project and this handbook can add some values. I think that's really what the overall aim of the handbook is. But while we're talking about this handbook, maybe we should take a step back and also identify why it is so important to talk about evaluation in general. Why evaluation? Why we have a project around evaluation? Are we focusing on learning? Are we focusing on accountability? Often it's seen as a check-the-box exercise in many organizations. What is our thinking beyond that?
Well, everybody evaluates. Let's say every day we have some kind of evaluation of what happened to us today. The question about evaluation and why it became so important is a lot about answering a question. A key question is, are we doing with the resources we are applying what is more important? And the community, the international community, started trying to answer to this question with even, let's say, everyday more sophisticated methods. Some, and Eduardo comes a bit from there, were concerned with estimating, let's say, estimating returns from investment, and if we really reach targets. With time, we start also considering that it was important to understand not only if we have been successful, if we produced change, but how did we produce the change. But in the end of the day, as you said, let's say the big concern are these two keywords, that is accountability. So we need to answer to those that have a legitimate interest in an operation about what we are doing and about learning. That is, we want not to repeat the same errors. There is a saying that says that if a train goes in the wrong direction, the more it moves, the more far away it is from its final target. And so we want to avoid our operations and our emergency operations to be trains going the wrong direction. So, and on top of that, in emergency contexts, we must be aware of that. We often face tough field conditions. So every lesson that we can learn from an experience might be useful in another experience. And I think that's a bit why we are discussing so much evaluation. Of course, in different contexts, I would say there is, in some countries and in some agencies, more pressure for accountability, basically for knowing if the resources we are allocating are, let's say, being spent in the best way. and probably in some other agencies and in some contexts we are more concerned in not repeating errors, but in the end of the day is a mix of both almost always.
Yeah, I also think it's important to keep a balance and to be aware of those both sides, so you don't lose focus of one because you over focus on the other. I also think very much that it's kind of from one grows the other, right? We can only move on once you know something. So you know you reach your target, but in the next project you might not have reached the target. So you go back and want to understand where it went wrong and what has gone wrong. And I think that's very, very much where this learning process has come from as well in evaluation. So yes, keeping this balance between accountability and learning and understanding the factors that play a role in deciding whether to focus more on accountability or on learning are very crucial. But obviously they both play different parts in participatory evaluation, where we have a slightly larger focus on learning, but we shouldn't underestimate the accountability aspects there, because when we hear you speak, Paolo, about accountability. We hear it in an upwards manner, but we also have this downward spiral of accountability towards project participants, project owners, final beneficiaries of projects. So when we're looking at participatory evaluation then a bit more in detail, I think it's quite generally accepted that there's not a very specific definition around participatory evaluation. But that it involves a range of levels of participation. Eduardo, would you like to reflect a little bit more on that? How do you see that? And maybe share your own experiences in that as well, approaches versus an actual participatory evaluation.
Right. So this, I think you touched on an issue that has been one of the many challenges in this project, and it's generally a challenge when you're working on a relatively new field of study, which is, do we have a standard definition? Do we need one? Or should we work with a diverse range of definitions, ideas of what participatory evaluation is and what it should be? And to be perfectly honest, it was a bit disconcerting for me. I come from a background of impact evaluation, and that is generally very standardized.
Mr. Econometrics man.
That's right. And so we try to standardize as much as possible processes, definitions, and we really want to arrive at something that you can measure objectively everywhere you're looking, and you develop methods to compare them. Whereas in participatory evaluation, what we found, looking at the existing literature, talking to practitioners, is that there is no standard definition. And we came to accept, in my case reluctantly, that this was probably for the best, right? So what we're talking here about is a very wide range of methods and techniques of incorporating this bottom-up feedback, this bottom-up information into the process and making sense of it. And the strength here doesn't come from objective standardized measuring, as is the case with impact evaluation. This is the strength of impact evaluation. But the strength of participatory evaluation is in its adaptability to different contexts, different realities, the way that you're really not going to expect to do the same thing in northern Brazil or in Turkey, in the Turkish-Syrian border, or in sub-Saharan Africa, or in Afghanistan, right? So practitioners really need to develop they do not need sort of a checklist, but they need a sense of how to incorporate a certain type of information into the policy making process, right? So what we're trying to do, one of the big challenges for me in looking at the chapters of our handbook is that we're not teaching something that is standardized. We're trying to teach something that is really has a lot to do with developing a feeling, a subjective sense of how to incorporate information into the policy making area.
If you allow me, because I think that here we have, let's say, two steps. On one hand, we depart from impact counterfactual evaluation, which still makes sense. Let's say it's not the business of this handbook, but it's very relevant and it's important. But we move one step further or beyond, depending on the approaches. But we move one step aside. Let's say that is, we move to the idea that we could say is a realist approach, that contexts influence results, and you need to understand the context in order to understand what works where, because the same measure may work in a certain context and not work in another context, and that's where probably now, not thinking from a methodological point of view, that's where we reach the need for participation, is that we also need to understand the meaning that the actors give to the actions they are doing. So if I want to do a behavior change and I'm hurting the feelings or the conscience or the religion or the beliefs, I will not generate the support that is needed to incorporate these change. Annelien uses quite often this example from UNICEF that maybe you can talk to us about let's say, the narratives of change in the life stories.
Yes, Pauli, you're talking about the most significant change method there. And it's very much what you say, right? It's very much that if we do not include those and for who the project is intended to be, and who then actually decides what impact is and how what change a project, what the importance is of change in a project. Is it that it has reached the target, or is it actually that individuals have an increased capacity or have an unintended result that is not being measured in a different type of evaluation? And the most significant change method actually is a method in which people are also being empowered. So it goes beyond a standard approach in which we look at results, but in which the people who are part of the evaluation, actively part, involved to a high extent, undergo it as an empowering methodology in which they can become agents of change within their own communities. There's quite some literature on that online, so of course please go ahead and look, but it's actually currently one of the methods that's being used a lot in participatory evaluations, and very relevant to measure this type of empowerment that's taking place as part of this type of participation. I think that's also very much, going back about diverse contexts, what works in one and what doesn't work in another, maybe why our handbook is also relevant, as it shines some light on the different contexts that we're having, specific case studies from Brazil, from Colombia, from the Turkish-Syrian migrant crisis as well. So I think there's a lot there that demonstrates that although we might be looking for coherence, that's not always possible to achieve. Rather, there's not a standard measure or one-size-fits-all approach in participatory evaluation, but something that you learn. And that's actually something that's, I think, one of the other aspects maybe that I just wanted to highlight with you and go in a bit more as we are trying to work with students and bring them skills. What would be kind of the skills you think that or evaluators that want to do participatory evaluations, what type of skills would be important for them to have? What do you think? Obviously, they have to work a lot with people. They have to work in different contexts. So how do you see that? What do you think would be important aspects and skills to develop for them?
I think that, first of all, there is a question that goes beyond professional skills, because it's an ethics question. And an evaluator or a practitioner engaged in evaluation should never forget that he is supposed to be independent and impartial. So he's not going to enter in the conflicts that he's going to live. He's not going to take sides in the evaluation, and he or she must be knowledgeable about, I think, two things: the technical field of the project and the qualitative techniques that is going to be used. And that's part of the target of the handbook. It's having, I would say, these three things: the concept and the ethics, let's say the right attitude, the knowledge of evaluation field, in which there is today an heritage, in which we have international guidance referring to the online sources. I would say for those working in European context, there is eval said. For all of us, the United Nations Evaluation Group has a set of standards and norms that is available in several languages, and that is very, very useful. And also this capacity of being involved in qualitative research and managing contexts that might be of some tension, because this is not a fairy tale. So sometimes we are, let's say, engaged in intense situation. And connecting with this, though a bit independent, but coming back to what is participatory evaluation, I think that these skills relate with the question about specificities of participatory evaluation. We already use here the expression, but I think that we can have an use of the expression in a broad sense and in a stricto sense. In a broad sense, it's participation every time you have a methodology to listen to stakeholders. So in a certain sense, even a classic impact evaluation has a participatory dimension. At least, for example, when you're negotiating the objectives of the evaluation, when you're defining the evaluation questions, if this is negotiated with different stakeholders, this is already a participatory, let's say, aspect. So we could say, and we say it in the handbook, so you can have participatory as a tool in every kind of evaluation. But then you have a stricto sense, so that we also try to focus on. That is what in literature is being called the empowerment evaluation. So in which you don't try only to listen to stakeholders. We could say that participatory lato sensu is about the evaluator listening to everybody and to identify, to have a mapping of stakeholders and identify who has to listen and, let's say, take the lessons from these perspectives. But the empowerment evaluation wants to go further. And as we were saying, as Annelien was mentioning about the significant change, this is an example in this sense. We also want not only to measure the outcomes, let's say the results of the intervention, but also to understand how the outcomes change the person. Because so when you have an intervention that is, for example, providing seeds to women in a village to start farming, let's say you have an outcome, a technical outcome that is improving the food sustainability in the town. But when through that process you give power to women that were already farming, but when you give them power over the process, for example, you lend money to them to buy their own, let's say their own supplies. You give them the seeds, you give them control over their resource, over their lives. That might be a life change in other aspects. And if we don't have a participatory approach to evaluation, we will miss that link. So we will, Eduardo, forgive me. So we will know that that cereals were produced, but we will not be able to grasp that women's role in the town, or let's say in this case in the village, changed, and that's one of, I think, the advantages of participatory evaluation in humanitarian and emergency contexts, because one of the things, and we are talking about something that is spoken in another chapter, but one of the things that is happening is that more and more the emergency and interventions and humanitarian aid interventions are not short-term, let's say, disaster management. They are processes to improve resilience for the next risk, for the next exposure to risk. So just to give an example, if after an earthquake or a cyclone, you rebuild a village in the way it was built before, it will be probably destroyed again in a later stage. So what we are trying is also to promote development. It's so-called nexus between humanitarian aid and development that is changing most of the humanitarian aid operations. And to improve this resilience, we will need, let's say, technical inputs, but one of the inputs we will need is the empowerment of the communities to lead with these resources and these opportunities.
Right. And if I could add something to that, I don't think this is necessarily a skill as we were talking before, but certainly an attitude that is critical for this is empathy, right? So when I'm engaged in some kind of impact evaluation, 95% of my conversations will be with fellow academics and policymakers. And those conversations will dictate what I'm measuring, why I'm measuring, how I'm measuring. They will tell me, okay, so my goal with this is to reduce illiteracy or to boost food security or something like that. And this is coming from policymakers, not coming from beneficiaries, right? So and that dictates the process. Again, nothing wrong with that. I do that myself all the time. And that's very useful. Policymakers have difficult jobs and they really need to know if what they're doing is the money they're spending is actually achieving the results that they expected. But on the other hand, you really not necessarily, as you do that, you're not necessarily paying attention to the feedback that is coming from the bottom up. Your program, as Paolo was saying, your program to boost literacy might also be affecting, for the beneficiary, might be more important because it's affecting gender relations in their community. And you have no idea about that. You just focused on literacy because that's what the policymaker told you to do, right? And in participatory evaluation, you're more to take up again a metaphor that you brought about the train going in the wrong direction. In an impact evaluation, you're trying to figure out whether you're going in the right direction. Are you increasing literacy or not? Is it bang for the buck or not? But in a participatory evaluation, you can be agnostic about where the train should be going, right? So you're really giving voice to the beneficiary to say, well, in my opinion, the train should go in this direction. Really, the policymaker thinks we should go to the left, but we really should be going to the right or something like that, right? So I think one attitude that if you're going to be engaged in evaluation and in particular in participatory evaluation you should have is empathy for the communities where you're working and keeping an open mind to the experience that beneficiaries of the program you're working on have on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and it's what you both say, right? It generates deeper insights in different contexts, which is so crucial, especially in humanitarian settings. As Paulo mentioned, this nexus of development and humanitarian, even peace building overlapping, having chronic crisis, as we say, that obviously also changes how aid is being done. We're having currently many debates about localization, about ownership, about how we can have better and more meaningful inclusion of those who are actually receiving aid, recipients of aid. I've done myself some research on that in the Gaza Strip, but I really would like to.
But you can tell us something about that.
Well, yes, of course. I think it's one of those aspects that's really interesting. Is that often we still perceive recipients of aid as recipients, purely as recipients, with not having the power or the agency that they actually do have. We kind of ignore those aspects, and even and maybe especially in humanitarian emergencies, people are very resilient. Often the first aid providers are people from the local communities. So
Which are normally forgot.
Yes, exactly. So I think there's a lot of for us also as practitioners and academics in this field. But what we're also trying to bring out, I think, in our handbook in that aspect is how to make sure that we can learn from those experiences very much, right? And bridging that gap again between theory and practice.
Can I have some, let's say, a little teaser on this? Because this is for those that will be watching us and that who are willing to go to the handbook. Then you'll find the answer there. There is a question that might be helpful to understand this. Let's take the case of food aid. So these days, I would say we have three techniques. Giving money for people to buy food, for people to buy things, which may be food, giving these kind of cards that are for targeted use that was going to be in food, or giving food to people. I think these are, from an impact evaluation perspective, we need to know what we want to people, let's say, what we want to be the level of nutrition of the people after the program. And we will assess the success of the program mostly by measuring the improves in nutrition, in quantity of food and diversity of food and equilibrium of diet, etc. And so Eduardo will talk with nutritionists. We will talk with everybody. We'll make the, let's say, the perfectly fit supported people, and we will see which of the programs runs best. From a participatory perspective, we have to discuss different things too. Which of them gives people more freedom, more sense of ownership of the resources, which goes better with their social inclusion. How do they relate better to what? And I think this is just a case example. You can see it there, but I think this is a case example on basically none of these evaluations is. I would not say that one is right and the other is wrong, but they give us different insights on what is success and which of them, for example, educates better people to be able to, let's say, to feed themselves better. And I'm taking this example because this is an example that in the literature is studied, but that leads also to something that I've been looking at. It. For example, in some East Asian countries, we have levels of child malnutrition that are not explained by the economic difficulties of families. Has a lot to do with the place of children in the family. And if we want to be successful in supporting these families, we need to understand which is the mechanism for kind of symbolic devaluating the importance of feeding the child compared with feeding the other members of the family. I think this is one of the examples where our discussion on participatory evaluation can be useful and give us a learning, not only from the perspective of learning from the experience for the evaluators, but also to help the communities to learn from their own experiences.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect that you just mentioned. It's learning from your own experience, but it's also that ownership and to put it in the hands of the local communities to be able to make their own decisions and identify how they want to live their lives, how they can move on. And participatory evaluation is a tool of doing that. It's not the only thing we can do, but as Eduardo also said, there's no right and wrong in this, but it's a way of doing aid differently and learning from aid and how, because in all fairness, how long have we been in the business of aid, so to speak? And the same is for evaluation. Evaluation itself, we're very much still in a learning phase ourselves as well, right? So knowing that it comes from econometrics and other areas and social sciences and anthropology only new to this evaluation side of things, it's something that, that obviously comes stronger out in our project and hopefully also in the handbook. I'm very conscious about time, gentlemen. So I would like to just maybe to wrap it all up. What have been your own experiences on key learnings from the project and how would you like to take that forward? Just to wrap it up. Thank you.
Right. So my experience, I was brought in because of my experience in conducting impact evaluations, and so I was brought kicking and screaming into a whole new world. And I think the most important thing I'm taking here is I'm really looking forward to the challenge of integrating these two ideas and trying to make them work together in the field. This is, for me, the most difficult part of what's sort of making me think really in this project, because in my own experience, sometimes evaluations are box ticking exercises that you do because you have a funder or some organization that really wants you to do these evaluations, but in many cases your report ends up in a drawer somewhere, never to be read by anyone, never to be incorporated into anything. And that happens to all kinds of evaluations. And plus, they don't talk to each other, right? So we surveyed a number of organizations in Brazil doing evaluation, and they were doing impact evaluation, they were doing participatory evaluation, and they had no idea about how these two things could come together, how they complemented each other. So I think the challenge I see here, and the one thing I want to take into my own practice, is to try and be more conscious of how these things are complementary and actually can work together and strengthen each other.
I would like to underline one aspect that you will find in the vignettes of the handbook. That is the transfer of know-how that we did between Latin America, Europe, and Middle East about movement of population, about displaced people. Because our Brazilian and Colombian colleagues worked mostly in the context of the waves of people coming from Venezuela through the border, and our Turkish colleagues worked mostly with Syrian refugees coming also across the border, in this case escaping from a war zone. And one of the things that we saw that is very transferable with different links is, and we could see that in Colombia very, very specifically, is that in the beginning we have a kind of happy neighborhood experience, like parents coming home, but after some time we have tensions starting in this informal absorption mechanism. That to say that in this project we had not only the academic exchange and the I would say cross-fertilization of know-how from people working in a Latin American context and people working with European institutions. But we also had an empirical know-how crossing on the experience of, in Brazil, you have the name acolhida, so on, I don't know the exact English translation, but receiving, let's say. Welcoming. And the welcoming ways we could see, and you will see it in the vignettes of the handbook, the easy and difficult tasks around it. Furthermore, this was a unique experience in launching, designing from the scratch an evaluation unit, curricular unit for students that first is developed collaboratively, that has been developed by the 5 universities with people, as you could see here, by us with different approaches and backgrounds. And this is simultaneously also designed in a way to be useful for the community, not only for the academic students, but to be a practical tool for practitioners. So for me, this was a very good opportunity because we could find a commonality in the field approaches, and we have been working on it, and this handbook shows our experience of uniting different approaches to evaluation put at service of developing participation in evaluation and also cooperation between academicians and practitioners.
Yes, Paulo. Yeah, I agree actually with both of you. I have, of course, a bit shared the same experience in this, but for me,
we hope so at least.
For me, it's been also a pleasure actually to work with, of course, used to working with people from different backgrounds, but to actually work with evaluators from different backgrounds. I think that's something that maybe we can even elaborate on in the future. And as Eduardo already mentioned, learn by doing. We will also maybe come to more fruitful approaches in the future of how to merge this further. I think this has been a big learning for all of us on how it happens, what have been the key challenges, starting the project from scratch and actually ending up with strong participatory partnerships. I think it's been very positive, and actually I hope the handbook will bring this all beautifully out together and can be shared with many. So thank you very much for listening to our podcast. Thank you, Eduardo and Paulo. And thank you all for listening.